for the sound to not work on the last one. Here's a new reading video. This is the only video you're going to be responsible for. Let's get right to it. Echad dinei mamanot ve'echad dinei nefashot b'drisha v'chakira. Mishnah 32a, Lam Ben Aleph says, both monetary cases and capital cases have probing questions, investigating questions to the witnesses. Shene Emar, Mishpat Echad Yelachem. As the pasuk says, there shall be one law, one legal system for you. Ma bein dinei mamanot dinei nefashot. Mishnah then asks, what is the difference between monetary cases and capital cases? Dinei mamanot b'shlosha. Monetary cases have 3 judges. V'dinei nefashot be'esrim b'shlosha. Capital cases have 23 judges. Dinei mamanot potchin bein l'schut bein l'chova. In monetary cases, we begin, like which side gets to go first, bein l'schut, bein l'chova, either for the innocent side or the guilty side. Basically, either side can go first. Dinei nefashot, potchin l'schut, ve'ein potchin l'chova. And in capital cases, we open with the innocent side. The innocent side gets to go first, ve'ein potchin l'chova, but we do not begin with the guilty side. And we'll fast forward now to the Gemara. Dinei mamanot, mi ba'inan drisha v'chakira. In monetary cases, the Gemara asks, do we really require mi ba'inan drisha v'chakira? Do we really require probing questions? Uriminhu. They have a contradiction. Shtar shezmano katu ve'echad b'nisan b'shmita. So we quote a Braita that says as follows: a contract is written on the time. I apologize for the bell. The date on the contract is Aleph Nisan in the Shemitah year. Uva'u edim va'amru, and new witnesses, so Reuven and Shimon sign the contract, and now Levi and Yehuda come, and they say, hey, achatem idin al shtar zeh. They ask the original witnesses on the contract, how are you testifying, hey, achatem idin, how are you testifying al shtar zeh, on this contract? V'halo, is it not true? B'yom ploni, on that day, Aleph Nisan, imanu hayitem, you were with us, b'makom ploni, in a different place. The contract says Aleph Nisan Riverdale, but you were with us on Aleph Nisan in Boston. The Braita concludes, Shtar kasher ve'idav ksherin, the contract is valid and the witnesses, the original witnesses, are valid. We don't say that they're lying. Chayshinan, we assume, we are concerned, Shema ichruhu v'kitvuhu. Perhaps they delayed and wrote the contract, meaning that they actually did see the loan happen, and the date is the date that they wrote on the contract is a later date. V'isal kadatach, and if you want to say, ba'ina drisha v'chakira, we require probing questions, heichi chayshinan shema ichruhu v'kitvu. How is it that we are assuming that perhaps they waited and wrote the contract? If the judges are allowed to ask questions, they would just ask the question to clarify. But we're saying the judges are assuming things, and as we mentioned, if you're assuming something, it clearly means you don't have all the information. So this Braita is describing a world in which the judges are not asking probing questions. We fast forward to the answer here. Amar Rabbi Chanina says, he's going to resolve our contradiction. Davar Torah, the deoraita rule. Originally, echad dinei mamanot ve'echad dinei nefashot b'drisha v'chakira. Both monetary cases and capital cases had drisha v'chakira. And here we'll fast forward to this Rashi here at the bottom of the page. Amar Rabbi Chanina, who's going to tell us like a little bit. We'll finish up here. Shne'emar mishpat echad yelachem. So according to the Torah, Davar Torah, both monetary cases and capital cases have probing questions, as the pasuk says, mishpat echad yelachem. And Rashi tells us, Amar Rabbi Chanina, umatnitin deoraita. The Mishnah, our Mishnah, Masechet Sanhedrin, is the deoraita rule, is the Torah rule, kamei takanta, before the decree, meaning the rabbis later made a decree. This is the Mishnah where we ask for questions, was the rule before the decree. Vraita, and the Vraita that we read, Dirabanan, is the rabbinic rule, batar takanta, after the takana. So the Mishnah and the Vraita don't contradict each other, Rashi tells us. One is telling us the original Torah rule, one is telling us the updated rabbinic rule. But now we're going to wonder, okay, so why did the rabbis change the rule? And what's the reason the rabbis said that in monetary cases we do not require probing questions? In order that we don't lock the door in the face of borrowers. The brief explanation was that if we ask a lot of questions, witnesses will get disqualified, even if they're telling the truth. And since witnesses will get disqualified, lenders won't get their money back sometimes. And if lenders don't get their money back sometimes, they'll be unlikely to give loans in the first place. So we want to encourage people to give loans. So the rabbis removed the requirement for probing questions. Elameata, but if that's true, if we don't ask probing questions anymore, ta'u lo yishalmu. The rule should be that if Beit Din makes a mistake, they should not have to pay. We know that the rule is, the Gemara just knows that Beit Din has to pay if they make a big mistake. They pay the party that was messed over, but that seems unfair. We're not going to read the Rashi inside, but we read that if Beit Din was allowed to ask questions, they could clarify things. They wouldn't make mistakes. So we're penalizing Beit Din for making mistakes when we're kind of handicapping them and not allowing them to prevent their mistakes. Gemara responds, Kol shekain shetin ol bedelet bifnei lovin. All the more so that would lock the door in the face of borrowers. And if we removed the safety of the judges paying back the loan in case everything goes wrong, then we're disincentivizing people to give loans. The lender knows that in his back pocket or their back pocket, they can say, okay, I'll get the money back from Beit Din if everything goes totally wrong. But if we remove that rule, so we say, yeah, it is hard to be a judge. Judges are not allowed to ask questions, and I apologize for the bell again. Judges are not allowed to ask questions, and judges have to pay for the mistakes that they make. And we fast forward to the next little sugya over here about reopening a case. Our Mishnah had said that in monetary cases, we can reopen the case. If we find new evidence or the judge makes a mistake, Uraminhu, we have a contradictory Mishnah. Dana Tadin, if someone judged the judgment, basically they made a verdict, Zikata Chayav, they said someone who was chayav, someone who was guilty, they decided they were innocent. Chayev tazakai. Flip side, someone was really innocent, they said they were guilty. Timei tatahor, something was really tahor, an object was pure, but they declared it impure. Tiher tatamei, or said something was pure if it was really impure, which could cause a financial loss if someone throws out their produce because you said it was impure or something like that. Masha asa asui. So in the case where the judge clearly made a mistake, what's done is done. V'shalemi beito, and the judge has to pay for it. But the contradiction being, our Mishnah said we reopen a case, machzirin. This Mishnah is saying, Masha asa asui. What's done is done, meaning you can't reopen a case. So how do we resolve the contradiction? Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Lo kasha. There's no conflict. There's no problem. Kan b'mumche. Our Mishnah, where we reopen a case, is talking about an expert judge, which we don't have to read Rashi inside, but we should understand that an expert judge is trusted to say, yeah, I messed up. Let's reopen it, and no one can kind of protest and say, oh, you don't know what you're doing, because we're dealing with an expert. But this Mishnah from Bechorot, which says that we reopen, which said what's done is done, is talking about a non-expert judge. A non-expert judge, the person who won the case is going to be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? You don't know what you're doing. You can't just, there's no do-overs, no backsies. You made a decision. So an expert judge, no one can protest. Everyone would trust their decision to reopen the case. A non-expert judge, we say like, yep, no backsies. You messed up. You have to deal with it. Because the people in the case are not going to accept your flip-flop. And Rav Nachman is going to give us, sorry, not Rav Nachman, we skipped that. Rav Sheshet is going to give us a different explanation, a different way to resolve the contradiction. Rav Sheshet Amar Khan, our Mishnah, which says that we reopen the case, Sheta'a b'dvar Mishnah. You reopen the case if the judge made a mistake in Dvar Mishnah, in the words of the Mishnah, which we said literally means like an explicit mistake. It's clear that there's an explicit rule and they just messed up. Then you reopen the case because it wasn't like their verdict wasn't really a verdict in the first place. It was like they made it was so clearly wrong. But the Mishnah where we say what's done is done, sheta'a b'shikul hadad. That's when they mess up in terms of literally means weighing their knowledge. And we'll see a little bit later what that means. That's when, if they make a less clear, explicit mistake, we say what's done is done. Amar Rav Sheshet, we prove the statement. Rav Sheshet said, Amar Rav Asi, then Rav Asi, Ta'a b'dvar Mishnah. If you make a mistake in Dvar Mishnah, Choser, you go back and reopen the case. Ta'a b'shikul hadad, but if you make a mistake in weighing your knowledge, if you make like a gray area mistake, Eino Choser, then we don't reopen the case. And now we try to identify, so how do we define Dvar Mishnah and Shikul Hadad? How do we define an explicit mistake versus a gray area mistake? Amar le Ravina Ravashi. So we have this conversation between Ravina and Ravashi, who are the editors of the Gemara. They're like the last people in the latest Amoraim in the times of Gemara. Afilu ta'ab Rabbi Chia Rabbi Yoshia. Ravina says, if the judge makes a mistake in the matters of Rav Chia and Rabbi Yoshia, which we said is the Tosefta. These it's not the Mishnah, it's not literally the words of the Mishnah, but it's a real source. What if you mess up in that type of rule? It's like not the Constitution, but it's the Bill of Rights. It's a real second level source. Amarle, Ravashi responds in. Yeah, that's also considered an explicit mistake. That's considered to'eh b'dvar Mishnah. You're just wrong. Afilu b'deravu Shmuel, and Ravina asks, what if I make a mistake even in Ravu Shmuel, which are Amoraim, the early Talmudic sages? What if I make a mistake on that stuff, on the Gemara, basically on early Gemara stuff? Is that considered an explicit mistake? Amarle in. And he responds, he said to him, yes, that's also an explicit mistake. Afilu b'didi v'didach, and he says, what about, this means with me and with you. What about if like our discussions that we're having right here? Is that considered like a real explicit rule that if you get it wrong, we say you reopen the case? Amar le, and Ravashi responds, Atu anan, are we katle kane ba'agma? Are we like anan? Are we like reed cutters in the lake? Being like, what are we, chopped liver? You think we're so insignificant? We're the sages of today. If we make an explicit ruling, that's considered an explicit rule. So now, so he said that to'ebed dar mishnah, an explicit mistake, means a mistake on any clear explicit source. Doesn't matter, Mishnah, Gemara, Tosefta, they're all considered explicit rules. Heisi dami shikul hadad. Then what is the case of shikul hadad? How? So what is it if we? How do we say that? What's a gray area mistake? Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, Kigon. An example, Trei Tanae or Trei Amorai de Pligi Hadade. We have a case where two Tanaim, two Mishnah rabbis, or Trei Amorai, two Gemara rabbis, de Pligi Hadade, have a machloket with one another. So in a Mishnah, it says that Rabbi Akiva says one thing, Rabbi Tarfon says another thing. Velo Itmar, and it did not, Velo Amar, it did not say Hilchata lo Kamar, Velo Kamar. It didn't say the halacha followed this rabbi or that rabbi. It literally means master. So there was no explicit conclusion in the Mishnah or the Gemara. The ikri va'avad kechad minai. I want to make sure I'm translating the word ikri correctly. And he happened to rule like one of them. So our judge, Rabbi Tartzark, he followed Rabbi Akiva. The sugya de alma, where you see on our Gemara that's like a sugya de shmaisin. Sugya de shmaisin literally means the sugya, the discussion here, but it's not on this video, but we corrected this as like a scribal error. It really means the overall approach. The overall approach is Azli Ki'idach follows the other ones. Rabbi Hartstark, the judge, followed Rabbi Akiva in this machloket, but everyone in the whole world, kind of the majority view of how to determine the machloket is the other side. It's Rabbi Tarfon. Hainu Shikul Hadad. That's Shikul Hadad. So Shikul Hadad is basically it's a mistake. The judge has to know which way the world follows when there's a machloket, and if he chooses the wrong one, it's not a clear, explicit mistake. It's not like he ruled against the Mishnah, but he ruled against the prevailing approach, and that is considered it's still a mistake, but it's a mistake that we do not reopen the judgment, and that is the end of the video that we are responsible for.